Listen carefully, because most people will never change their life, not because they can't, but because they keep repeating the same 7 habits that silently destroy success every single day. Successful people are not lucky. They are not special. They are not even more talented. They are trained by habits, small, repeated actions that compound over time until their life becomes unrecognizable. In the next hour, you are going to learn 7 of those habits. Not theories, not motivation, real, practical habits you can start today that separate winners from everyone else still waiting for the right time. Pay attention, because what you ignore today will define your next 5 years. Chapter 1. Stop waiting, start moving. You are not stuck because you lack ability. You are stuck because you keep waiting. Waiting for clarity, waiting for confidence, waiting for the perfect moment that never arrives. That is the trap, and most people live inside it for years without realizing it. Let this be clear. You have a choice. You can keep preparing, planning, overthinking, or you can move. That's the key. Movement creates clarity, not thinking, not analyzing, not waiting. Action. Most people get it backwards. They believe they must feel ready before they start, but readiness is a myth. Nobody ever feels fully ready. Not entrepreneurs, not athletes, not leaders. They start unprepared and become ready through action. That's the difference. Look at every successful person you admire. They didn't start with certainty. They started with confusion. They started with fear. They started messy, but they started. And that's what separated them from everyone else still waiting for permission. You don't need permission. You don't need approval. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need the full map. You just need the first step. That's it. But here is where most people fail. They overthink the first step until it becomes a theory instead of an action. They research endlessly. They plan endlessly. They watch others execute while they stay in preparation mode. And slowly, opportunity passes them by. It's not about intelligence. It's about discipline. The discipline to act before certainty arrives. The discipline to move while still unsure. The discipline to accept mistakes as part of the process. You have a choice. Stay in your head or enter the real world of action, because the real world rewards movement, not thinking. Every delay you make is costing you time you will never recover. Every "I'll start tomorrow" is a silent agreement with stagnation, and stagnation is the enemy of success. Not failure, not competition, stagnation. Because here is the truth. You don't learn by thinking, you learn by doing. You don't gain confidence by waiting. You gain confidence by surviving action. And you don't build direction by planning endlessly. You build direction by moving forward and correcting along the way. That's the key. Start before you're ready. Adjust while moving. Action creates direction. Think about anything you are postponing right now. A project, a skill, a business idea, a decision. You already know enough to begin. You just don't trust the process yet. But trust is not required. Movement is required. The people ahead of you are not smarter than you. They are simply in motion. They made decisions while you were still thinking. They failed while you were still planning, and now they have momentum while you have hesitation. But that can change immediately. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. You have a choice, and that choice defines everything that comes next. Because success does not reward intention, it rewards execution. And execution only begins when waiting ends. So stop negotiating with your fear. Stop delaying your progress. Stop waiting for signs that were never coming. Start moving, even if it is imperfect, especially if it is imperfect. That is how momentum is built. That is how confidence is formed. That is how direction becomes clear. And once you understand this, everything changes. You stop asking, "Am I ready?"
and start asking, what can I do right now? Because now you understand the rule. Move first, clarity follows, always. And once you master movement, you will no longer fear uncertainty, you will use it. Now that you understand the power of action, we go deeper, because movement alone is not enough without control.
Chapter 2. Master your morning or be controlled all day. Your day does not begin when you wake up. Your day begins the moment you open your eyes and decide who is in control. That is the truth most people never confront, because from that first moment there are only two paths. You either take control of your morning, or your morning takes control of you. You have a choice, that's the key, and that choice happens before anything else, before the phone, before the messages, before the noise of the world enters your mind. Most people lose their entire day in the first 30 minutes, not because of hard work, but because of distraction. They wake up and immediately surrender their attention. Notifications, social media, other people's opinions, other people's problems. And just like that, their mind is no longer theirs. But successful people operate differently. They don't react, they design. They don't scroll into chaos, they step into structure. They don't give their attention away, they guard it. You don't need their permission to do the same. You don't need the perfect schedule. You don't need a perfect life. You just need discipline in the first hour. That's the key. It's not about motivation, it's about discipline. Discipline to delay distraction. Discipline to sit in silence. Discipline to take control before the world takes it for you. Think about it clearly. If the first thing you consume is noise, your entire mindset becomes noise. If the first thing you consume is clarity, your entire day becomes structured. Own your morning, own your mind, own your outcomes. That is not a phrase, that is a system, and systems create results, not emotions. Let's break it down practically. The first 10 minutes after waking up, no phone, no messages, no external input. That is your mind's reset zone. If you skip it, you are already behind. The next phase is clarity. What matters today? Not everything, not the world, just today. One focus, one direction. That is enough. Most people fail here because they try to do everything. But success is not about everything, it's about control. You don't need 10 priorities. You need one clear target and the discipline to execute it. You have a choice. Stay reactive like everyone else, or become intentional like the few who build real success. Because here is what happens when you don't control your morning. You become available to everything except your own goals. You start responding instead of building. You start reacting instead of creating. And over time, your life becomes a reflection of other people's demands. But when you master your morning, you flip the system. You stop reacting. You start directing. You stop consuming chaos. You start producing clarity. That's the shift. It's not about waking up early for the sake of it. It's about waking up with intention. It's about deciding before the world decides for you. It's about protecting your mental space like it is your most valuable asset, because it is. You don't need their permission to do this. You don't need the perfect environment. You just need consistency, daily repetition, the discipline to say not yet to distraction and yes to structure. Because every successful person you admire has already learned this truth. The morning is not just part of the day. The morning is the foundation of the entire day. And if the foundation is weak, everything built on it collapses. So build it strong. Own your morning, own your mind, own your outcomes.
And once you understand that control begins with your first hour, you will never look at time the same way again. But control alone is not enough, because discipline without consistency fades. Next, we go deeper.
Chapter 3. Discipline is more powerful than motivation. Motivation is a lie most people keep believing. It feels good. It sounds powerful. It gives you energy for a moment. But then it disappears. And when it disappears, so does your progress. That is the trap. Waiting for motivation to move you. Waiting for a feeling to push you. Waiting for a spark before you act. But you have a choice. That's the key. You can keep living by feelings, or you can build discipline that does not depend on feelings at all. Motivation is temporary. Discipline is permanent. Let that sink in. Because everything you want in life sits on the other side of consistency. Not inspiration, not excitement, not emotion. Consistency. Most people fail not because they lack talent, but because they depend on how they feel. When they feel good, they act. When they feel tired, they stop. When they feel unmotivated, they quit. That is not a system for success. That is a system for inconsistency. And inconsistency destroys everything. You don't need their permission to act without motivation. You don't need perfect energy. You don't need the perfect mindset. You need discipline. That's the key. Discipline is doing what needs to be done regardless of how you feel. It is structure over emotion. It is action over mood. It is commitment over comfort. Look at anyone who has actually achieved something meaningful. They didn't wait to feel inspired. They showed up when they didn't feel like it. They worked when it was boring. They continued when nothing felt rewarding. That is what separates them. Not talent, not luck. Discipline. You have a choice. Either keep negotiating with your emotions or start building control over your actions. Because emotions will always change. One day you feel powerful. The next day you feel drained. One moment you feel focused. The next moment distracted. If your life depends on that fluctuation, your results will always be unstable. But discipline removes that instability. It creates structure. It creates predictability. It creates results. It's not about waiting for the right mood. It's about executing regardless of mood. Do it tired. Do it bored. Do it anyway. That is the rule. And the moment you accept that rule, everything changes. You stop asking, do I feel like it? And start asking, does it need to be done? Because discipline does not negotiate. It does not wait. It does not pause for comfort. It moves. Think about the times you gave up. It was never because the task was impossible. It was because you didn't feel like continuing. That is the silent killer of progress. Not failure, not difficulty, but emotional surrender. And most people surrender without even noticing. But you don't need to be most people. You don't need perfect energy. You don't need constant motivation. You don't need to feel ready. You just need repetition. Because repetition builds identity, and identity builds results. When you repeatedly act without relying on motivation, you become someone who doesn't need motivation to act. That is power. That is control. That is discipline. So stop waiting for feelings to guide your life. Feelings are not leaders. They are followers. They change too quickly to be trusted. You have a choice. Either let emotions control your actions or let discipline control your emotions. And once discipline takes over, motivation becomes irrelevant. It becomes a bonus, not a requirement. That's the shift. Do it tired, do it bored, do it anyway. Because success is not built in moments of inspiration. It is built in moments of refusal. Refusal to stop. Refusal to quit. Refusal to depend on feelings. And once you master that, you are no longer controlled by your emotional state. You are controlled by your decisions. Now that discipline is no longer optional,
we go deeper into what shapes it.
Chapter 4. Your environment is either building you or breaking you. Most people think their biggest problem is discipline. It is not. Your real problem is your environment. You have a choice, that's the key. You can keep blaming willpower, or you can finally understand that your surroundings are shaping your behavior every single day, whether you notice it or not. Because willpower is weak against environment, always. You don't rise to the level of your intentions, you fall to the level of your surroundings. That is the truth. And it explains why you keep repeating the same habits even when you decide to change. You are not just fighting yourself, you are fighting your environment, your social circle, your phone, your room, your routine, your noise, your inputs. Everything around you is training you. That's the key. Most people underestimate this. They think success is about trying harder. But it's not about trying harder. It's about removing friction and removing influence that pulls you backward. Look at your social circle. Who are you surrounded by? Because you slowly become the average of the people you tolerate. If they complain, you start complaining. If they delay, you start delaying. If they settle, you start settling. Not because you chose it, but because exposure shapes behavior. You don't need their permission to outgrow them, but you do need awareness. Now look at your digital environment. Your phone is either building your focus or destroying it. Every notification is a micro-interruption. Every scroll is a micro-distraction. Every quick check is a break in your mental momentum. And you think it doesn't matter, but it does, because attention is currency, and your environment is constantly spending it for you. That's the key. Then look at your physical space, your room, your desk, your workspace. Is it designed for focus or for distraction? Because chaos outside creates chaos inside, and clarity outside creates clarity inside. You have a choice. Keep living in an environment that pulls you into distraction, or redesign it to support your discipline. It's not about motivation, it's about structure. Change your environment or remain the same person. That's the rule. And it is non-negotiable. Because even the strongest discipline will eventually break if it is surrounded by constant resistance. And even weak discipline can become strong if the environment is supportive enough. That is why successful people are intentional about everything around them. They don't rely on willpower, they rely on design. They design their space to reduce temptation. They design their circle to increase accountability. They design their inputs to strengthen focus. They don't ask, how can I resist distraction? They ask, why is distraction even available here? That shift changes everything. You don't need their permission to remove what is holding you back. You don't need approval to clean your space, change your circle, or control your inputs. You just need awareness. Because once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Every distraction you tolerate is shaping your future. Every negative influence you allow is rewriting your habits. Every uncontrolled input is programming your behavior. And slowly, without realizing it, your environment becomes your identity. So if you want to change your life, don't start with effort. Start with environment. Because effort fails in a bad environment, but discipline grows in a good one. That's the key. And once you take control of what surrounds you, you stop fighting constant resistance. You start operating in alignment. But even a perfect environment means nothing without focus. Next, we go deeper.
Chapter 5. Focus on one thing until it grows. Multitasking is not a skill. It is a distraction. And most people don't realize this. They think doing many things at once makes them productive. But in reality, it makes them scattered, inconsistent, and slow. You have a choice. That's the key.
You can either spread your energy across everything, or you can concentrate it into one direction until it becomes unstoppable. Because success does not come from division. Success comes from focus. One goal, one focus, one direction. That is the rule. And the people who understand this are the ones who rise faster than everyone else, not because they work harder, but because they work deeper. Depth beats speed every time. Look at anyone who has achieved mastery in any field. They did not jump from one thing to another. They stayed, they focused, they repeated, they refined, they improved the same thing over and over until it became valuable. That's the key. Most people fail because they never stay long enough in one direction to see results. The moment something feels slow, they switch. The moment something gets difficult, they abandon it. The moment progress is not instant, they quit. And then they start something new and repeat the cycle. But success does not reward movement without direction. It rewards consistency in one direction. You don't need their permission to focus. You don't need validation to commit. You don't need multiple paths to feel secure. You need one. And you need discipline to stay with it long enough for it to grow. It's not about doing more. It's about doing less with more intensity. That's the key. Think about it. Every successful person you admire is known for something specific. One skill, one craft, one focus, one identity they mastered. They became dangerous in one area before expanding anywhere else. Because focus compounds. Every hour you spend on one skill builds momentum. Every day you stay consistent builds strength. Every month you remain committed builds identity. But when you divide your attention, you reset your progress constantly. You never build depth, you only collect fragments. And fragments do not create success. Focus does. You have a choice. Keep jumping between ideas or commit fully to one and let it grow. Because growth requires time, and time only works in your favor when you stay consistent long enough for it to compound. That is where most people lose. They underestimate time. They overestimate speed. They expect results in days instead of understanding that mastery is built in seasons. But those who win think differently. They are not rushing, they are building, slowly, deeply, intentionally. One goal, one focus, one direction. Say it again until it becomes your default mindset. Because the truth is simple. You cannot grow everything at once, but you can grow one thing enough to change everything else. That is how success works. And once you commit to one path, something powerful happens. Your energy stops leaking. Your attention stops scattering. Your progress becomes visible. Because focus creates momentum, and momentum creates results. But focus alone is not enough without direction in your choices. Next, we go deeper into the habits that shape your identity.
Chapter 6. Stop seeking validation. Start building value. Most people are not stuck because they lack ability. They are stuck because they are addicted to approval. And that is the silent killer of progress. You have a choice. That's the key. You can either keep chasing validation or you can start building value that makes validation irrelevant. Because validation feels good, but it slows you down. It makes you pause. It makes you doubt. It makes you adjust your actions based on opinions that don't matter. And every time you do that, you lose momentum. That's the truth most people don't want to hear. They are not building their life. They are performing it, posting it, waiting for reactions, waiting for likes, waiting for comments before they feel like they are doing something meaningful. But successful people don't operate like that. They don't ask, what will people think? They ask, what am I building? That's the key. Because you don't need their permission to grow. You don't need their approval to start. You don't need their validation to continue. You just need discipline. And discipline does not wait for applause. Look at your attention right now. How much of it is controlled by what other people think? How many decisions are influenced by how they might react? How many actions are delayed because you are afraid of judgment? That is validation addiction, and it quietly destroys ambition. Because instead of building, you start managing perception. Instead of improving your craft, you start improving your image. Instead of focusing on results, you focus on reactions. And reactions do not build success. Value does. You have a choice: stay trapped in approval-seeking behavior or break out and focus entirely on output. Because output is what creates freedom. Output is what builds reputation. Output is what attracts respect naturally. Not performance, not attention. Output. That's the key. Look at social media. It is the biggest validation loop ever created. Every scroll teaches your brain to seek reaction. Every post trains you to measure worth through engagement. Every comparison slowly shifts your focus from creation to consumption. And over time, you stop building for yourself. You start building for approval. But approval is unstable. It changes daily. It depends on trends. It depends on opinions. It depends on things you cannot control. So if your motivation depends on it, your progress will always be unstable too. That's why you must detach. Build in silence. Let results speak loudly. Repeat that until it becomes your standard. Because silence protects focus. Silence protects clarity. Silence protects momentum. When no one is watching, you are free. Free to fail. Free to learn without pressure. Free to build without distortion. That is where real progress happens. Not in public reaction, but in private repetition. You don't need their permission to disappear and build. You don't need their approval to stay consistent. You don't need their recognition to become valuable. You just need to focus. And every time you choose value over validation, you regain control over your direction. Because validation asks, will they like this? But value asks, does this actually matter? And only one of those questions leads to success. So stop performing. Stop adjusting your path for applause. Stop slowing down for opinions that don't build anything. You have a choice. Keep chasing approval or start building something that earns it automatically. And when you finally detach from validation, something powerful happens. Your energy returns, your focus sharpens, your output increases. Because now you are no longer distracted by noise. You are building. Quietly, consistently, relentlessly. Build in silence. Let results speak loudly. And once you understand that, you stop living for reactions and start living for results. But value alone is not enough without the willingness to fail and learn quickly. Next, we go deeper.
Chapter 7. Fail fast, learn faster. Most people are not afraid of failure. They're afraid of looking like they failed. And that is why they never move fast enough to succeed. You have a choice. That's the key. You can either avoid failure your entire life, or you can use failure as the engine of your growth. Because failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of success. Let that sink in. Every successful person you admire has failed more times than you will ever hear about. But they didn't stop there. They didn't freeze. They didn't retreat into fear. They failed, they learned, they adjusted, and they moved again. That's the difference. You don't need their permission to fail. You don't need approval to make mistakes. You don't need to be perfect before you begin. You just need movement. That's the key. Because when you move, you generate feedback. And feedback is more valuable than perfection. Feedback tells you what works and what doesn't. Feedback removes confusion.
Feedback builds direction. But when you avoid action, you avoid feedback. And when you avoid feedback, you stay stuck in theory forever. Most people think success comes from getting it right the first time, but success actually comes from getting it wrong faster and adjusting faster than everyone else. That is the real advantage. Look at business, look at careers, look at skills. No one gets it right immediately. The difference is speed of learning. Some people fail once and quit. Others fail 10 times and improve each time. And those who improve each time eventually separate themselves completely from the rest. Not because they were better, but because they were willing to stay in the process longer. You have a choice: fear mistakes or use mistakes. Because every mistake you avoid is a lesson you delay, and delayed lessons delay your success. That's the truth. Now, think about your own life. How many things have you avoided because you didn't want to get it wrong? How many opportunities have you delayed because you were afraid of looking inexperienced? That fear is expensive. It costs you time. It costs you growth. It costs you momentum. But failure is cheap when you understand it correctly, because failure is not loss, it is data. Every failure is feedback. Every mistake is data. Say it again. Every failure is feedback. Every mistake is data. That is the mindset shift. Once you adopt it, everything changes. You stop taking failure personally. You stop attaching emotion to mistakes. You stop seeing setbacks as endings. Instead, you see them as instruction. Because every failure tells you something. What didn't work, what needs adjustment, what direction is wrong, what approach must change. That is powerful information, and the faster you collect it, the faster you grow. That's the key. But most people move too slowly because they are trying to avoid embarrassment. They are trying to protect their image. They are trying to look competent instead of becoming competent. And that slows everything down. You don't need to look ready. You need to be learning. And learning only happens through action. You have a choice. Stay in the comfort of perfection or enter the speed of progress. Because perfection is slow, but learning is fast, and speed wins. The faster you fail, the faster you learn. The faster you learn, the faster you improve. The faster you succeed. That is the cycle. So stop protecting your ego. Stop avoiding mistakes. Stop delaying action. Start moving. Start testing. Start adjusting. Because every attempt teaches you something valuable. And over time, those lessons compound into mastery. Now that you understand how to use failure as fuel, the next step is controlling what you allow into your mind.
Chapter 8. Control your inputs or lose your outputs. Most people think their problem is effort. It is not. Your real problem is input. You have a choice. That's the key. You can either control what goes into your mind or accept whatever comes out of your life. Because what you consume shapes what you become. Always. There is no exception. Your thoughts are not random. Your focus is not accidental. Your behavior is not mysterious. It is all a reflection of what you repeatedly expose yourself to. That's the truth most people ignore. They want better results but consume worse inputs. They want focus but feed on distraction. They want ambition but consume content that kills ambition. And then they wonder why nothing changes. It's not about effort alone. It's about mental diet. Garbage in, garbage life out. Let that sink in. You have a choice. Either you control your inputs or your inputs control your future. That's the key. Every video you watch, every post you scroll, every conversation you engage in is shaping your mindset, slowly, quietly, consistently, and over time it becomes your identity.
If your input is low-value content, your output will be low-value thinking. If your input is distraction, your output will be scattered action. If your input is negativity, your output will be hesitation and fear. It always matches. That is why discipline is not just about action, it is also about protection. Protection of attention, protection of focus, protection of mental clarity. Because your mind is not just a storage space, it is a processing system, and whatever you feed it, it processes into behavior. That's the key. Look at modern distractions, short-form content, endless scrolling, constant notifications, entertainment overload. None of it feels harmful in isolation, but combined, it destroys depth. It trains your brain to avoid focus. It conditions you to seek stimulation instead of concentration. It rewires your attention span without you noticing. And suddenly, deep work feels difficult. Silence feels uncomfortable. Focus feels unnatural. Not because you lost ability, but because your inputs changed your wiring. You have a choice. Stay exposed to everything, or become intentional about what you allow in. Because successful people are not just disciplined with actions, they are disciplined with inputs. They are selective with information, protective with attention, intentional with consumption. They don't consume everything, they consume what builds them. That's the key. Now ask yourself a simple question. What are you feeding your mind daily? Because your life is currently responding to that answer. You don't need their permission to filter your inputs. You don't need approval to unfollow distractions. You don't need validation to cut off noise. You just need awareness. And once you become aware, responsibility begins. Because you cannot complain about lack of focus while consuming things designed to destroy focus. You cannot expect clarity while feeding on confusion. You cannot expect ambition while drowning in entertainment that replaces ambition. Everything competes for your attention, and what wins your attention shapes your life. So be selective, be intentional, be strict. Garbage in, garbage life out. Repeat it until it becomes a filter in your mind. And once your inputs are controlled, your outputs begin to change naturally. Your thinking sharpens, your focus deepens, your actions become cleaner. Because now your mind is not overloaded with noise, it is aligned. And alignment changes everything. But even with perfect inputs, nothing changes without consistency. Next, we go deeper.
Chapter 9. Consistency creates the lifestyle you want. Most people misunderstand success. They think it is one big moment, one breakthrough, one lucky opportunity, one viral result, one perfect decision. That is false. Success is not a moment. Success is repetition over time. You have a choice. That's the key. You can chase intensity, or you can commit to consistency. Because intensity is loud, but it fades quickly. Consistency is quiet, but it builds everything. Let that sink in. The life you want is not built in bursts of motivation. It is built in small actions repeated daily, even when nothing feels exciting. That's the truth most people ignore. They start strong, they feel motivated, they push hard for a few days, then life gets normal again. Energy drops, excitement fades, and everything stops. Not because they failed, but because they were never consistent. Consistency is what turns ordinary people into exceptional results. That's the key. Think about it clearly. One day of effort means nothing. 1 week of effort creates momentum. 1 month of effort creates structure. 1 year of effort creates identity. And identity is everything. You are not what you do once. You are what you do repeatedly. So, if you repeat distraction, you become distracted.
If you repeat discipline, you become disciplined. If you repeat focus, you become focused. It is that simple. But simple does not mean easy, because consistency requires showing up when you don't feel like it. It requires doing the same actions even when results are not visible yet. It requires trusting the process when nothing looks like it is changing. That's where most people quit. They expect early rewards. They expect immediate proof. But consistency does not work like that. Consistency builds silently before it becomes visible. That's the key. You don't see growth daily, but growth is happening daily. You don't see change immediately, but change is accumulating in the background. And one day it becomes obvious. But only for those who stayed consistent long enough to see it. You have a choice. Keep chasing intensity and restarting your progress every time you lose motivation, or commit to consistency and let time multiply your effort. Because time is not your enemy. Inconsistency is. Look at anyone who has built real success. They did not rely on bursts of energy. They relied on repetition. Same actions, same discipline, same focus, over and over again. Not because it was easy, but because it worked. Do it daily. Don't break the chain. That is the rule. Say it again. Do it daily. Don't break the chain. Because the chain is your progress. Every day you show up is another link. Every day you skip is a break in momentum. And broken momentum is hard to rebuild. Most people underestimate how powerful small actions become over time. 1 page read, 1 workout done, 1 hour of focused work, 1 decision repeated daily. Individually, they look insignificant, but over time, they become transformation. That's the truth. You don't need to do everything at once. You just need to do the right things repeatedly. And eventually, repetition turns into results. Results turn into habits. Habits turn into identity, and identity turns into lifestyle. That is how success is built. Not through intensity, but through consistency. You have a choice. Build in bursts and restart constantly, or build slowly and never restart again. Because every restart delays your life. Every inconsistency resets your momentum. Every break in discipline costs you time you cannot recover. But consistency compounds everything. So stay consistent, even when it feels slow, even when it feels invisible, even when it feels pointless. Because it is never pointless. It is building something you cannot yet see. And once consistency becomes your identity, success is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you naturally produce. But consistency alone is not enough without identity. Next, we go deeper.
Chapter 10. Become the person success recognizes. At this point, you should understand something most people never fully grasp. Success is not something you chase. It is something you become. You have a choice, that's the key. You can keep trying to get success, or you can become the type of person who naturally produces it. Because everything in your life flows from identity. Not motivation, not luck, not timing. Identity. That's the truth most people miss. They focus on actions without changing who they are being. They try to build success habits while still thinking like someone who is not successful. And that conflict always breaks consistency. Because your behavior will always align with your identity. Always. That's the key. If you see yourself as inconsistent, you will act inconsistently. If you see yourself as undisciplined, you will eventually justify undisciplined behavior. If you see yourself as average, you will unconsciously make average decisions. But when identity shifts, behavior follows automatically. You don't need constant motivation. You don't need external pressure. You don't need reminders. You just act in alignment with who you believe you are. So the real question is not, what do I want to achieve? The real question is, who do I need to become to achieve it? You don't need their permission to change your identity. You don't need validation to upgrade your mindset. You don't need approval to start thinking differently. You just need awareness and repetition. Because identity is built through repeated decisions. Every time you choose discipline over comfort, you reinforce a disciplined identity. Every time you choose focus over distraction, you reinforce a focused identity. Every time you choose action over delay, you reinforce an action-driven identity. And slowly, without noticing, you become that person. That's the key. Most people fail because they try to change outcomes without changing identity. They want better results while keeping the same habits. They want a new life while maintaining an old mindset. But that is impossible. Your life will always reflect your identity. So if you want a different life, you must become a different person. Not temporarily, permanently. Think about it clearly. Successful people don't constantly debate their actions. They don't ask themselves every day if they feel like working. They don't negotiate with discipline. They operate from identity. I am the kind of person who shows up. I am the kind of person who finishes what I start. I am the kind of person who does not break discipline. That is how they think. And because they think that way repeatedly, they act that way naturally. You have a choice. Keep acting like someone trying to succeed, or start becoming someone who already does. Because the difference is everything. Trying is unstable. Becoming is permanent. Trying depends on motivation. Becoming depends on identity. And identity is built through repetition. Change who you are, and your life follows. Let that sink in. Every habit you build, every decision you repeat, every action you take is shaping your identity right now. Not in the future, not someday, right now. So the question is simple. What identity are you reinforcing? Because whatever you reinforce is what you become. That's the truth. And once you accept this, everything becomes clearer. You stop chasing, you stop hoping, you stop waiting, and you start building yourself deliberately, day by day, choice by choice, action by action. You become the person success recognizes because you are no longer separate from it. You are aligned with it. That is transformation. Not external change, internal identity shift. And when identity changes, everything else becomes automatic. Your habits change. Your decisions change. Your discipline changes. Your results change. Because you changed first. That is the final lesson. You don't chase success. You become it. And once you become it, you no longer need to search for it. It follows you. Change who you are, and your life follows. Everything you've heard in this audiobook was never about information. It was about transformation. 7 habits, 7 shifts, 7 decisions that separate people who stay stuck from people who rise. You now understand that success is not an event. It is repetition. It is discipline. It is environment. It is focus. It is identity. And most importantly, it is action taken when it is uncomfortable, not when it is easy. But understanding changes nothing. Only execution does. If you go back to your old habits, your life stays the same. If you apply even one of these habits consistently, your life starts to shift in ways you cannot yet imagine. So here is your challenge. Do not just listen, act. Pick one habit and start today. Not tomorrow, today. Because today is where your future is built. If this audiobook gave you clarity, intensity, or direction, Then like this video, subscribe to MindShift Audiobooks, and stay locked in for more transformations like this one. Because the truth is simple. Either you control your habits, or your habits control your life.